Imagine this. You've just been betrayed by someone you loved, maybe a partner, a parent, or a lifelong friend. The rupture wasn't loud, it was quiet, confusing. One day they pulled away, offered no explanation, and vanished, leaving only fragments behind. You replay every moment. You search for meaning in text messages, facial expressions, half-finished sentences. You tell yourself, if I could just understand why they did this, I could move on. But days become months. The silence grows heavier than the wound itself. You crave an apology that will never come. You long for a moment of honesty that died long ago. And still you wait for closure. And here lies the great paradox. What if closure is not something they give, but something you stop waiting for? What if needing closure is a form of emotional captivity, a final plea for dignity from someone who already proved they can't honor you? Why do we tie healing to explanation? Why do we need a story to feel at peace? And who decided that understanding must precede release? We worship the idea of emotional resolution like it's a finish line, something owed to us at the end of pain. But what if that idea itself is the thing keeping us broken? The truth is unsettling, and it begins with this: not everyone deserves closure. Let's go deeper. Closure is seductive. It promises clarity, dignity, and release. It says once you know why, then you can stop hurting. It wears the mask of healing, but beneath it lies something darker: control. The belief that if we can understand the narrative, we can control the pain, that we can reduce chaos to a clean sentence, a confession, a reason. But life rarely offers that kind of symmetry. Alain de Botton, the philosopher who quietly dismantles modern myths, reminds us that closure is not a universal right. He writes, "We may never know why someone left, why they stopped loving us, why they harmed us, and that has to be enough." In this statement lies the challenge. Not everything unfinished must be concluded. Carl Jung would have called our obsession with closure a projection of the wounded ego. The ego wants a villain, a final scene, a lesson. It cannot tolerate loose threads. But the psyche, your deeper, unconscious mind, does not care for neatness. It seeks integration, not explanation. And integration often requires facing the truth. Some people exit your life as enigmas, but we don't want enigmas. We want order. Friedrich Nietzsche warned that human beings are meaning-making machines. We would rather invent reasons than accept silence. In Thus Spoke Zarathustra, he alludes to the burden of human consciousness, the relentless need to ask why, even when there's no answer. That's why closure becomes dangerous. It's no longer about healing, it becomes an addiction to narrative, and modern culture feeds it. Every romantic drama ends with a heart-to-heart. Every TED Talk has a resolution. Even our grief is expected to be orderly, moving from denial to acceptance like a 5-stage checklist. But human emotion isn't a staircase, it's a spiral. And not every spiral ends with clarity. There's also a darker psychological force at play: attachment trauma. People who were emotionally abandoned early in life often cling to closure as a means of reclaiming control. If a parent left without explanation, if love was conditional and inconsistent, the child becomes the adult who can't let go until they hear, "Here's why I hurt you." It's not just about understanding, it's about being seen, validated, chosen, even in the aftermath. Gabor Mate, in his work on trauma and addiction, says that we become addicted not just to substances, but to emotional cycles. Waiting for closure is one of those cycles. It gives us the illusion that something is still alive, that the connection, however painful, still matters. As long as we're waiting, we're still connected. In that sense, closure becomes a coping mechanism for abandonment. But here's the paradox. Waiting for closure often delays healing more than the wound itself. The mind loops, replaying conversations, dissecting events. The heart becomes a courtroom, gathering evidence, preparing arguments for a trial that will never come. You start to define your worth by the explanation you never received. And yet, the world keeps moving. The person who hurt you may not be thinking about you at all. They may never offer a reason. Not because you don't deserve one, but because they aren't capable of giving it. And that's the truth most of us avoid. Closure requires emotional maturity, and not everyone possesses it. So why do we still chase it? Because we're taught that healing is transactional. That closure is the final receipt. That peace comes from the outside in, but maybe it doesn't. Maybe peace begins not when they explain themselves, but when you no longer need them to. That is the fracture between illusion and freedom. And most people never cross it, but those who do experience something rare. Let's look at what happens when they don't, and the hidden cost of waiting for answers that never arrive. At first, the wait for closure feels noble. You tell yourself you're being emotionally mature, that you're holding out for truth. You say you just want to understand. But underneath the surface, something corrosive is forming. You begin to live in the limbo of unfinished pain. Your identity becomes entangled with the person who left you in silence. You rehearse their absence like a script, memorizing the things you wish you could say. You imagine their explanations, their regret, their confessions, but they never come. And in the silence, your mind fills the void with distortions. This is the unseen consequence. You start to make yourself responsible for their silence. If they didn't explain, maybe you weren't worth the explanation. If they ghosted, maybe you weren't lovable. If they disappeared, maybe you were forgettable. The mind, driven by cognitive biases, creates its own narrative, and the protagonist is always you, but so is the villain. One of the most dangerous biases at play here is the self-serving bias flipped inside out. Instead of protecting your self-esteem, it punishes you. You start believing that you must have done something wrong, something unforgivable. After all, why else would someone vanish without a word? This isn't just emotion, it's neurological. Your brain is wired for pattern completion. When something doesn't make sense, it exhausts itself trying to resolve the ambiguity. Neuroscience shows that the brain reacts to uncertainty much like it does to physical pain. In other words, waiting for closure is not just emotional torture, it's neurological punishment. But modern culture rarely talks about that. In fact, we romanticize closure. We make it seem like a necessary part of growth. Social media is filled with messages like, "You can't move on until you've healed properly," or "You deserve a goodbye." But what if the real healing happens without the goodbye? We've turned closure into a cultural script, and when life doesn't follow it, we panic. We feel like the story is incomplete. But here's the secret. Life doesn't follow story arcs, only fiction does. People don't always explain why they stop loving you. Alain de Botton calls this the fantasy of emotional symmetry, the belief that the depth of your pain must be matched by the depth of their remorse. But reality is often asymmetrical. You might be carrying a wound someone else doesn't even remember causing, and this asymmetry has a price. While you wait for closure, you delay your evolution. You put your life on pause. You become emotionally handcuffed to someone who's already moved on. The ghost in your head becomes more real than the people around you. This trap of rumination doesn't just affect relationships. It spills into your work, your creativity, your energy. You begin to live through the lens of unresolved narratives. Every new relationship becomes a potential courtroom. Every goodbye becomes a trigger. You stop trusting people, not because they hurt you, but because someone else didn't explain why they did. And the cruelest part, the person you're waiting for isn't waiting with you. They're living their life. They may not even remember the moment that shattered you. That's not because you're unimportant. It's because some people move through life without understanding the impact they leave behind. So what happens when you finally realize they're not coming back, not even with an explanation? That realization isn't the end of the story. It's the beginning of something else, something radical, something liberating. Let's talk about the rebellion. You've been taught that closure is a gift someone else gives you. But here's the revolution. What if closure isn't a gift at all? It's a skill. The moment you stop waiting for someone else to liberate you, you take your first step toward psychological rebellion. It is the quiet refusal to let your healing depend on someone else's capacity to explain themselves. It is an act of war against emotional dependency disguised as romantic loyalty. Imagine this rebellion as a fire, not a raging one, but a slow, steady burn, the kind that consumes old beliefs. You don't shout about it, you don't write long letters, you don't make one last phone call. You simply decide, this person no longer has the authority to define my peace. It begins with an unsettling truth. You may never get the apology you deserve, and that has to be okay. This isn't about denying pain, it's about refusing to let it own you. Think of Viktor Frankl, who survived the brutalities of Nazi concentration camps. He wrote that between stimulus and response, there is a space, and in that space lies our freedom. The stimulus is the betrayal. The response is the endless need for explanation. But in the space between, there's a third option: release. To release is not to forget. It is to stop negotiating your self-worth with someone else's silence. Carl Jung said, "I am not what happened to me, I am what I choose to become." That choice becomes available only when you stop circling the drain of closure. As long as you're waiting for someone to give you peace, you are still handing them power. But when you close the door yourself, without their permission, you do something profound. You become your own resolution. This rebellion is internal. It might look like indifference, but it's not. It's sovereignty. It's the quiet power of no longer needing them to understand what they did in order for you to heal. You become the final editor of your own emotional story. You stop waiting for an ending that fits the fantasy and accept the ending that reality gave you. That's what Alain de Botton speaks to when he says that maturity is the ability to move forward without having all the answers. Maturity is embracing the ache of incompleteness. It's sitting with ambiguity and still choosing to rebuild. You rewrite the story, not to make them the villain, but to make yourself the hero who walked away from unfinished pages. You practice radical acceptance. I may never know why, and I don't need to anymore. That sentence is a psychological exorcism. It removes the ghost of what if and replaces it with what now. Sometimes the rebellion is as simple as refusing to check your phone one more time. Sometimes it's deleting a message thread you've read 1,000 times. Sometimes it's sitting in silence and saying to yourself, they don't owe me peace. I give it to myself. And in that act, you reclaim the only thing that ever mattered, your own authority over your inner world. You're not healed because they apologized. You're healed because you stopped needing them to. That's when you begin to touch something rare, something higher. Let's now explore that final, most powerful realization, the truth that changes everything. There's a moment, quiet, almost unnoticeable, when you stop asking, why did they leave, and start asking, why did I keep waiting? That shift doesn't come with fireworks. It doesn't announce itself. It just arrives, like a dawn breaking over the ruins of your old self. And in that moment, you understand the truth. Closure was never about them. It was always about you. We are conditioned to believe that emotional wounds must be stitched shut by the same hands that caused them. Alain de Botton once said that we often demand closure because we're afraid of chaos. We want emotional events to make sense. But life doesn't make sense in the ways we want it to. People leave without explanation. Lovers change their minds, friends betray for reasons they themselves can't articulate, and the cosmos doesn't send a memo. There is no final answer, only your interpretation of the silence. This is the highest truth. Closure is not something you find, it's something you create. It is not an event, it is a decision. a spiritual act of authorship over the story you've been telling yourself. And here's the paradox. The moment you stop needing closure is the moment you receive it, not from them, but from yourself. You look back at the pain and realize it doesn't need to be explained to be released. It doesn't need to be validated to be real. It doesn't need a final chapter. It only needs a new direction. You no longer need to understand why it broke, to understand why it no longer serves you. This is not just psychological liberation, it's existential freedom. Jean-Paul Sartre believed that human beings are condemned to be free. That freedom means we are always responsible for giving our lives meaning, no matter what has been done to us. No excuses, no waiting, no permission. In the absence of closure, we are free to become something new, something undefined by abandonment, something shaped not by what was withheld, but by what we chose to reclaim. This freedom is not clean, it's messy. You might still think of them at 2 a.m. You might still ache when a certain song plays, but the difference is you no longer interpret that ache as unfinished business. You interpret it as the echo of something you survived. And maybe that's the final truth. Closure is not peace that erases the past. It's peace that includes it. It's the ability to carry the wound without letting it define your worth. It's saying, yes, this hurt me. Yes, I'll never know why. And yes, I'm still whole. This is the wisdom they never taught us. That closure isn't an ending. It's a shift in authorship. It's when you take the pen back. It's when you stop writing their name into every chapter and begin the story of who you became after. You might not have received an apology. You might never get one. But you get to walk away anyway. And that is closure. Some wounds don't close, not because they can't, but because they're not meant to. They remain slightly open, not to torment you, but to remind you of your capacity to survive without answers. You waited. You replayed the silence. You tried to make sense of what was never explained. But now, something within you stirs, a quiet defiance, the realization that you do not need permission to begin again, that your healing does not require a final scene, a perfect explanation, or a clean goodbye. Closure isn't found in their regret. It's found in your refusal to let pain become identity. It's the moment you say, I will never know why, but I will still choose peace. And in that sentence, you set yourself free. You walk forward, not because the past makes sense, but because you no longer need it to. You carry the silence like a scar, not a chain. A reminder that you once loved deeply, that you once waited honorably, and that eventually, you chose yourself. And maybe that's the most radical act of all, to no longer need what hurt you to make you whole. You are the closure. You always were. Now turn the page. If this message stirred something in you, if it whispered a truth you've long felt but never said, don't let it end here. Subscribe to WiseOga for more insights that challenge, awaken, and transform. And if someone you love is still waiting for closure that may never come, share this with them. Let's grow a wiser world together.